I'm broadcasting live from Seattle, Washington. Adam, tell everybody where you are.
Hi, I'm in Bothell, Washington, so not far from Seattle.
And Adam is at the helm of Woodinville Wine Country and is dedicated to showcasing the regions of the premier wine industry of Washington wine. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And right now, I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'm Jessyca Lewis. I am a marketing and digital strategist for the brands you know and love. I have a live broadcast on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm looking at doing Twitch and also doing live broadcast on Instagram. And you can follow us on the following platforms right now. And we're going to talk to Adam today about his background in the wine industry and what he's doing for Washington Wine. And Woodinville is about 10 minutes from me. And what do you think? Want to talk about Woodinville real quick?
Yeah,
Sort of
let's talk about
what you
Woodinville.
think about it?
Yeah, it's what moved me out to the West Coast, right? Is coming out to Woodinville, it's fun. Woodinville is a wine destination unlike any other in the world because we don't have any vines, and that really kind of shocks people when they first get to us. But if you've ever been to Washington State, 99% of the vines are, use this map right here. It's growing on this side of the Cascade regions, and Woodinville is really set up as kind of the storefront for the industry. It was set up, Chateau Saint Michel set up shop there back in the 70s. And then over the years, just more and more wineries kind of moved in. And we're 16 miles from the center of downtown Seattle as the crow flies. And we're a 5 by 2 mile, city with a population of 14,000 people with over 120 tasting rooms. And it's kind of incredible because in that span of 120 tasting rooms, you can taste 19 of Washington's 20 AVAs all in one day. We represent a little over 12% of the entire wine industry has a storefront in Woodinville. So it really gives a great way to connect and explore the wine when you're coming to visit Seattle without having to make the trip all the way across the mountain range to the vines.
And that sounds just wonderful. I've been over there quite a bit, and also the concerts in the summer are fantastic.
They are, yeah. San Michel's got a partnership with Live Nation, this intimate little 4,500 seat theater on the back end of Chateau Saint Michel that sees artists like John Legend, or last year we saw Counting Crows come through, which was fantastic.
Yeah, I was watching what was going on over there. It's just great. Concerts in this area is kind of like just fantastic anyway. So do you want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about your work history?
Yeah, well, we were talking about music. My background is from the music industry. I moved to Nashville back in 2006 and started with working in the country music scene and toured with a few artists before making my way to a small little guitar company called Gibson Guitar, where I used to produce all of their events around the world and really kind of spend a lot of time in gigs and that got me really. I was 25 at the time, and it was a great time to explore the world at 25, hanging out with rock stars. But I also got to, I guess, grow my palate and my appreciation for good food and good wine from around the world. And after a few years with Gibson, I was handling a partnership between Gibson and another small brand called Jack Daniels. You might have heard of them a few times too. But got the chance to kind of handle their music marketing program, of course, across North America, and got to dip my toe in the alcohol industry and met some really great people. Really enjoyed my time working with Jack Daniels and Brown-Forman and a lot of their distributor and marketing reps from around the North America. And after that, my now wife, we had met when I was on the road with Jack, and we ended up getting married at a small little vineyard and winery just south of Nashville called Natchez Hills. And I decided to kind of come off the road and kind of take a passion project and get away from the big brands. And this little small, we had about 3 acres planted. It wasn't really a lot of vines growing in Tennessee at the time. Still isn't. But we imported a lot of fruit actually from Washington. We import fruit and juice from Walla Walla that would come into our tank rooms, and Over the next 3 or 4 years, I opened up 2 satellite tasting rooms for that brand, Natchez Hills, and ended up taking them into wholesale and started their e-commerce and their wine club, and kind of got to get really hands-on into everything DTC and sales channel related for that brand. And like most small wineries too, aside from selling the wine, you're also helping out with harvest, pruning, cleaning tanks, and everything else. So it was really kind of a fun trial by fire diving into the wine world, and I started to fall in love with it. And I decided I wanted to kind of stay in that wine world, I guess, for the rest of my career. So um, again, another fortunate incident, after that is as I got connected with the larger wine industry in Tennessee. And everyone always, when I say wine industry in Tennessee, they're like, "There's wine in Tennessee." It's like, yeah, well, there's wine in all 50 states. Tennessee just had some later starting time due to prohibition and some challenging laws that didn't make it legal until 1980 to actually commercially crush grapes. But yes, and then I took over as the first director of the Tennessee Wine Association. In that was back in when was that? 5 years ago now, 6 years ago. The organization been around for yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The organization been around for about 30 years, but they'd never had funding for a staff person, and someone from the Department of Ag knew me and said, "Hey, throw your hat in the ring for this position, and see if you can help grow the industry." So I had the pleasure of kind of you know solidifying that role, and work a lot of legislative initiatives. And politics is probably the least fun part of the industry. But I really enjoyed, working on with the universities and working on some workforce development and trying to getting some of our community colleges and our universities to help support the Tennessee wine industry at the time. Because one of the big challenges, I think, for every state that's trying to get their wine industry going is without having that support and buy-in from the state and at the university level, you really lack the research and the pipeline for workforce development that is needed to actually support the industry and grow it. Um, so I had a great time with doing that, and I ended up on the West Coast again, kind of by chance. My wife and I came out here in October of 21, so kind of that starting to come out of COVID phase, and we were looking at potentially coming out to the West Coast in the next 3 to 5 years of life. We since I kind of wanted to stay in the wine industry, and I kind of wanted to keep going up in my career and my knowledge base. Um, yeah, so we came out on vacation, and networking with some of the folks in Woodinville and Washington State in general on the vacation, I got a job offer. They said,
Oh,
"Hey, come out to Woodinville, and we're in the need of a, new director for the association, and we kind of need to do some rebuilding again post COVID because it affected a lot of associations heavily." And here I am. And so now this is now into my third year on the West Coast, and it's been a fun adventure so far.
I've lived in Eugene, Oregon, and I moved to Seattle. And when I first did that, I wasn't sure, I was afraid a little bit, and then I just love it. I
Yeah.
just went, woo! So much more interesting. Okay, so let's talk about your education. You want to talk about your educational background?
Yeah, well, I think when I decided that I wanted to be full into the wine industry, I kind of felt like I needed to have a full understanding of everything. My formal education is actually in philosophy and theology, and then I went to school for audio engineering before going into the entertainment industry. So um, I like a lot of people, there's a lot of different certifications out there, and I decided that the Wine Spirit Educational Trust was kind of the right path. So I jumped in, at the basic level one, which really was uh, at at the time that I entered it probably wasn't necessary, but it was great to get the vocabulary and the syntax
Mm-hmm.
that they kind of use. Uh, so in Nashville, we were fortunate enough to have a educator from Napa Valley Wine Academy on the ground in Nashville. So I was able to take level one, level two, and level three all in person, kind of that 2019, 2020, 2021 kind of time frame,
Mm-hmm.
all in person. And Jess, who's the instructor for Napa Valley, her and I became friends, and there's a whole little clique of us that we're tasting wine in the limited wine community that is in Nashville. um, but after I wrapped that up, and before we decided to move to the West Coast, I decided to keep going. So I started Diploma. So in the middle of Diploma, in the middle of COVID, I started up taking trips up to Chicago with the American Wine School because it was an easy access for me, and started to go through on D1, D2, D3, and all that fun stuff. And I just took my last exam back in October for Wines of the World. I've got a resit theory, unfortunately, in May, but everything else is done. So all the other sections of Diploma are done. So I don't. I feel a little bad that I didn't pass, but I don't feel as bad because Wines of the World is a hard section to pass. Um, so yeah.
I can only
Um,
imagine.
it, there's so much information, the breadth and the depth of everything, and then when you get into the actual exam, there's like 5 questions you have to answer, and it's kind of luck of the draw of what those questions are. And you know, do you I didn't spend enough time on, red wine of the Loire Valley, unfortunately, because normally when I think Loire Valley, I'm thinking, you know, white and sparkling and Cremants uh, and I didn't spend enough time on still wines of Portugal, unfortunately, either. Because again, I spent a lot of time on fortified wines of Portugal. But yeah, so that was kind of the wine education. It's been fun, and so I'll resit in May, and then after that, I'll take a much needed break and debate on whether or not I want to go for my MW, which originally I thought I did, and then I've met some of the candidates going through their MW, and I don't know if I can do that. It's intimidating.
It is intimidating. So what do you think? So I have a we set two. And so for you with a three and you're now on the diploma, what kind of doors do you think open for you having that education?
I don't know if I went into the education system looking for it to open doors. For me, it was at the time, kind of being in Tennessee and wanting to add some legitimacy to the Tennessee wine industry, because I felt like if I'm going to be at the helm of the Tennessee wine industry, I want to add some of that certification background, so people don't just think we're just you know a fruit wine, that there's legitimate wine coming out of here, and people that are leading it know what they're talking about. And um, even now, I think it's more just um, a desire for a self understanding and wanting to completely comprehend the field that I'm in. Um, but there are, and it is, there are doors that open up when you uh, have the education and certification backgrounds. But it's also kind of like, I feel like moving up to the West Coast is that WSET level 3 is kind of like having a high school diploma. When you get into the industry and kind of start moving up, like everyone is kind of at that level, whether it's WSET or the Guild or the CSW. They're kind of at that as the bare minimum benchmark point to get into where you need to keep going up the rung. And I think even without the certifications, there's plenty of ways to improve your wine knowledge and wine education. I've met a ton of liquor store owners and wine shop owners that don't have the certifications, but man, they devour the books about the regions like no one else. And honestly, they have more of an opportunity to taste because of all of the buyers walking into their store all the time.
And I think, I've just in general, I think the topic is interesting. So I like studying it too. And so,
Yeah.
and in Eugene, we had this little wine store. And then now I live down the street from Total Wine and More, which is like a Walmart of wine. It was,
Yep. Yep.
whoa. Okay. So let's talk. What do you think makes Washington wine special?
You, I think it really is the diversity of what is here. So my first trip to Washington State was probably 17 years ago. And at the time, I wasn't heavily into the wine industry, but what struck me as amazing was the topography and the microgeographies that are kind of laid out throughout the entire state. When you fly into Seattle, it has that very much that Gotham City, kind of feeling to it and as you start making the trek east, you go through the rainforest of the Cascade Mountains and up into the high plateaus and then down into the canyon of the Columbia Gorge. And I think that because of that diversity of geography and the microclimates that we've created, it's allowed for the 70 some odd different grape varieties that are kind of being played with all over the region, which is fantastic. And because there are such different growing conditions in Red Mountain compared to, say, Lake Chelan, um, you can have really great high acidic whites coming from that Lake Chelan area, or really hot, bold reds coming out of Red Mountain. And having that ability to have that diversity and have the honestly open space to grow is fantastic. And I know there's been a lot of debate in Washington State overall. Do you need to claim a varietal like California did or like Oregon did, with Pinot? And I don't think you really have to. I think that the diversity and excelling at multiple varieties based on what grows there is fantastic. It also kind of spreads the love. Obviously California, the largest growing, wine producer in the United States. We always concentrate on Napa and Sonoma and Central, but there's some cool stuff coming from San Obispo and from Temecula, and we're just starting to really get a chance to appreciate that as consumers. And some places in the world don't even get a chance to experience that. And I think Washington, because we're not pigeonholed into a single region and we are kind of spread out across the entire state, there's so many opportunities there. There's so many opportunities to grow grapefruit and great expressions of that fruit and kind of play. It's kind of like the Wild West of the wine industry, right?
Yes. And I wanted to ask you, I need to come back to it again in a minute. You were saying something and I was going to ask you about it, but I'll come back to it because I can't remember what I was going to say. I need to write it down when I'm listening. Okay. So how did Washington become the second largest wine producing state?
Chateau Saint Michel. No, I
Okay.
mean, no, it's Associated Vintners that later became Columbia, Preset Brands. Chateau Saint Michel obviously had a lot to do with it, with the volume. But it really is kind of guided by those few large producers that accelerate us into that second position. I talk about it all the time. In Woodinville, Chateau Saint Michel's on one side of the street, and they're producing 7 million cases a year, and across the street, is DeLille and Mark Ryan, and those are some of our other bigger producers that are in Woodinville, and we're talking about 100,000 cases. It's not like it's so the difference in there is just huge. And Oregon, I think, is running about 75% produce 5,000 or below. Washington is like 90% produce 5,000 or less cases a year. So really, it's that 10% producing more than 5,000 cases. But I think within that 10%, it's even less than that are producing more than 100,000 cases. So it's really been the push and the reach of those larger brands like San Michel that have gained Washington some notoriety. And it's also kind of been the birthplace for a lot of our other wineries. If you start looking at the winemaker family tree, there's a lot of tiebacks to San Michel. When you go out, Longshot came out of there, Mark Ryan came out of there, DeLille, there's a lot of guys that kind of branched off of those larger producers. And then we've gotten some really cool notoriety recently too from brands like Charles Smith, that are very popular, but also some cult classics, some cult followed wines like Coal City Creek. And it's not really the volume, but it is definitely helping with the reputation of Washington wine.
And what I was going to ask you about Washington wine is, so we're right next to a huge international city with was clearly a lot of tourism. So who would you say your target audience is? So who are the visitors?
In Woodinville or in Washington?
Well, Woodinville.
So it's funny. We work heavily with a system called Community Benchmark, which kind of ties into the POSs for a lot of the wineries. And we were surprised to find out that almost 70% of all the GTC sales in Woodinville are going to wine club people. So not just wine club shipments, but wine club members coming into a tasting room and purchasing more and more wine. And, you know, Woodinville itself has really, we do a great job at luring people in and kind of introducing them because of the San Michelle anchor. And it's kind of like the Macy's and the mall, and all the other wineries have been able to kind of benefit from that and grow their reach from it. But we also have a lot of Seattleites and people that live in Vancouver and the Puget Sound region in general, that are wine club members and come and visit us quite a bit. But then Seattle proper being a major port of call for Japan, China, Southeast Asia, we see a lot of folks coming in for the cruise lines for exploring Seattle. And again, Woodinville kind of acts as a storefront because it gives them a chance to spend 4 hours away from the city and experience Washington wine, find something they love, and bring that story back. So we are seeing people from all over the world kind of come through Woodinville, but there is still a large dominance of Washingtonians. Washingtonians love their wine. I thought I saw stats at some point that like 75% of the wine being produced in Washington is being consumed by Washington, which is, if that's the case, that's great. We're supporting local and drinking local. But one of my missions in my current role is to really kind of expand who's coming into Woodinville. So we spend a lot of time with the State Department of Tourism and Visit Seattle to try to lure in those domestic international tourists to kind of get them to bring the wine back to wherever they're from and tell the story and grow the Washington story.
Okay. And so what grape varieties thrive in Washington?
Well, of course, the charts will say Cabernet, Merlot, Chardonnay, Syrah. I think Syrah is amazing coming out of Washington State. Stuff out of Walla Walla and the Rocks District are amazing. We do great Cabernets as well. We do a lot of red blends, and I think that this is an important thing that especially the American consumer needs to get a little more used to, and they are. We see red blends doing really well. But the idea of pushing single varietal, I think, is problematic because there's a lot of vintage variation. And there's the opportunity when you really push more of the blending, the art of blending, that is more akin to what you find in the old world. And I think it's what really how Washington sells. It's not that singular variety; it's the marriage of those varieties that complement each other to, create that amazing wine experience each time. So while we grow, Merlot, Cabernet, Chardonnay, we do a lot of Riesling, Semillons coming out of here, Petit Verdot's coming out of here, Petit Syrah. There's a lot of stuff coming out of Washington State, but I think it's the blending that really makes it special.
So this is a little off the cuff here, but I want to ask you this question. So when you study wine, as you know, and I know, I've tasted hundreds of bottles of wine. I still have trouble if someone says, "What's your favorite wine?" I just kind of go blank. How do you get to the point where you can say, "What do you? Here's what I recommend with your dinner," or "Here's my favorite, things that I recommend to you," et cetera, et cetera. I'm not there yet. So,
Yeah.
and you probably are. So tell me what you need to do to get there.
Well, I don't know if so I get that question all the time. What's your favorite wine?
Yeah.
And I normally say it's the bottle I haven't had yet,
Okay.
because the thing that made me fall in love with wine is the fact that it's almost, I mean, really, it's each bottle is kind of its own unique personality, because that whole idea that you can take the same grapes from the same vineyard and give them to three different winemakers, you're going to get three different wines, is fascinating to me. And that those wines from that winemaker can then be go on different journeys in aging and transportation that change the flavor and the profile. And I feel like every bottle you open can potentially be different, and that's fun. That's great. I've never understood the idea of people that walk into a wine shop and go to the same bottle, same brand all the time. And I know certain people are going to hate that I say that because that's the brand loyalty they want. But as a wine person, that's the fun, is that variation. Um, so I don't have like a regular brand. I don't have a regular variety. I don't have a regular style. There's certain regions I prefer more than others, but I love exploring. And I think I also had the benefit of coming from the Tennessee wine industry and working with a lot of people from Ohio and Indiana and New York and New Jersey. And New Jersey's got a lot of write ups lately on the up and coming wine scene. But they work with hybrids and vinifera, and the vinifera that they're working with don't show the same traditional characteristics you'd expect to see from the vinifera out of there. And the hybrids they're working with, uh, some people won't even taste them because they're hybrids, but they're interesting and they're what grow in that area. And again, getting away from the whole big seven varieties that you got to drink Cab, you got to drink Chardonnay, you got to drink Riesling, you know, going back to the old world of what grows here, and we turn it into wine, and we make the best wine we can out of what grows here. There's nothing wrong with that, and I love that America is really starting to embrace some of that, or some of the regions are starting to push people to embrace that. Because my first trip to the Eastern Winery Expo up in Syracuse, New York, there's this grand tasting, and of course you got Pennsylvania, Vermont, New York, all these guys doing this little tasting, and I got introduced to Marquette, and I said, "Wow, there's something with this variety. Never heard of it before, never seen it in the store, but Marquette, it's fascinating." Coming out of Tennessee and Missouri, especially Norton. Norton's got some potential. I mean, it can be manipulated in certain ways that make it fantastic, and even Muscadine, which is you're from the South too, so I'm sure you know about Muscadine.
Yeah.
But I went to a Unified uh, Expo about 4 or 5 years ago and brought some. It was a fortified Muscadine from a winery called Solly Notch in the Appalachian Mountains. And
Oh, that's probably, I bet that was interesting. Yeah. That
you know
whole
what?
area is interesting.
It is, but once you fortify the Muscadine, it pulls away some of the foxy characteristics, which is great. But the way it oxidizes, you could pair it up against any other fortified wine, and it would sit and hold its own. So I think there's an appreciation for kind of what's going on with that. And so as a wine lover, it's what haven't I had, what's coming out, and if it's especially if it's a variety I've never tried before, yes, I'll try that, please.
And there's so many different trends right now. So let's talk a little bit about, what do you think the emerging trends are in the Washington wine industry, or just in the wine industry in general?
With the wine industry in general, and everyone hates that I say this, the obviously no and low alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know how we escape that. It's not a fad. We see the growing trend, not just with wine, but even with the RTDs and how they've kind of taken off on the marketplace, and how you now see big brands. It fascinates me when you go into um, a grocery store and you go to the beer section, and now that what was that no alcohol beer is now no alcohol beer from every major brand.
Mm-hmm.
Where you see the again, the RTDs kind of give the ability for those spirit companies to keep growing some market share at a lower percentage of alcohol mixed in. And yeah, so I don't think that's going away. And I know it's hard for the wine industry to kind of deal with that because of climate change. We obviously see increases happening in our alcohol levels. I've got a bunch of 60s, 70s, and 80s bottles of Associated Vintner and Columbia Valley, or sorry, Columbia Winery wines in my office, and every single bottle of red is 12.5%. I don't think I can find a 12.5% red coming out of Washington right now, unfortunately. So I think that due to climate change, we see a shifting of hotter wines, hotter reds, hotter whites. One, to get to the phenolic ripeness, but also just because that's just what's happening with the sugar levels. but the consumer trends of what they want are very different. Um, and I think that the big consumer trend too, besides, wanting to know and low alcohol, is looking at sustainability, looking at, or, things that are both, environmentally sustainable, a little healthier for you. And I had a large discussion about alternative packaging, because obviously the push right now is for lower weight glassware, just so you're not taking as much carbon footprint on the shipping and production of the wine. We do see some wineries, more and more experimentation with cans and Tetra Paks and everything else, which is great, because I think that pulls into that sustainability story. And I'm glad to see that kind of happen and move finally. Uh, and I think that as long as us as an industry don't remain authentic to what that is and remain authentic to true practices, not just kind of greenwashing what we're doing for sustainability, I think it'll resonate with the customers, especially the younger ones, and kind of gain some traction with them eventually. Um, but then we also have to find ways, and this is not really a trend, but this is, I think, just a solution to it. We need to find ways to really have that good quality wine go into the on-premise location and make it accessible for them to try to get into. And there's some differences, obviously, in Europe versus the United States, but in the United States, almost every restaurant you go to, a price point that is accessible for the younger drinker typically means it's subpar wine, unfortunately. And that's unfortunate, because I don't think you have that same case when you're in Europe, because you can spend €5 for a bottle of wine that is just amazing, that just lights your eyes up, and it's accessible for you to drink good wine. And I don't think it's been that easy to have good wine accessible at a good entry level price point here in the States. And I think that the industry really needs to focus on that change. I think that's one of the reasons that we've had trouble with, cans catching trend, or alternative packaging in general catch trends years back, because years back when we tried doing wine in can, it was bad wine that was going in the can. It wasn't great wine, and I'm not saying your whole portfolio has to do that, but you have to give that experience to the customer, where they can try amazing wine in alternative packaging, amazing wine in, at an affordable price point that lets them fall in love with it.
I agree. So the last question here, so we're at 33 minutes, so we need to close here pretty shortly.
Sorry.
So let's talk about, what is your favorite Washington wine? And I think you've talked about that a little bit, but if you want to expand on that, you can, and the one you haven't had.
The one I haven't had, no. No, and it's really hard, because
or you can talk about what your favorite wine is, but if we're doing this for Washington Wine Month, you might want to
Washington Syrah all the way.
Okay. Okay. And what do you pair it with?
A glass? No. I am a big fan of the fact that if you can drink a wine is both interesting and quaffable at the same time. I do appreciate wine and food going together, but I also really, really enjoy the fact that I don't have to have food with a good wine. That I can just simply enjoy it and enjoy where I'm sitting, and spend, an evening kind of first sip to halfway through the bottle kind of thing, getting to experience that wine and seeing how it kind of develops over, a 2-hour time period is really it. And to me, a lot of Washington Syrah, you can kind of do that with. It kind of expands and opens up, and you can kind of, a lot of them will be fruity and floral at the start of it, but you kind of dig into it and like, hey, wait, this got some funk to it, and that's kind of a good funk, and I think I like that. And,
Yeah.
So I think some Washington Syrah is fantastic, and I also can't go wrong with Riesling, because Riesling is, that I wish there was more of it in Washington. I think Washington gained some notoriety for a reason because of Chateau Saint Michel, but I think they've taken a bunch of what was being produced up for themselves. So there's not a lot of other wineries kind of playing around with Riesling as much, and that's unfortunate, because you can definitely get some Alsatian style Rieslings out of Washington, but you can also get some late harvest stuff if you're lucky. So it's fantastic.
Okay, well, thank you, Adam. So we're going to tell everybody bye now, and then we'll probably work on doing a live broadcast so people can ask us questions live. And this will be broadcast during Washington Wine Month. And so you're welcome to ask any questions. And thank you so much. And I am 10 minutes away from you in Linwood. So we'll chat soon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. We do our little closing thing here. I need to find it real quick. Here we go.